Hello, good evening, and welcome to Varsity Maine Live for the Portland Press Herald. I am Travis Lazarczyk. Tonight, I am joined by two newcomers to Varsity Maine Live from the Press Herald, my colleague Mike Lowe, and from the Kennebec Journal and Morning Sentinel, everyone's favorite wrestling heel in the state of Maine, the Belfast Bulldog himself, Dave Dyer. Guys, thanks for joining us. Our guest tonight is one of the most accomplished high school coaches in the history of the state of Maine. Her team, her Skowhegan field hockey team, on Wednesday night won its 20th consecutive regional title. I'll say that again because it's astounding. 20 straight regional titles. They have won 19 Class A state championships. They'll go for number 20 this weekend against Chevrolet. She has more than 500 career wins from Skowhegan Area High School. Paula Doughty, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let me start with this, Paula. Because of the success of your program, how much does that get talked about on your team, just on like maybe not a daily basis, but throughout the season? You know, you want every team to form their own identity, but does that tradition come up often when your team's just kind of hanging out?
I think it comes up during tournament time. During the season, I wouldn't say so much. You know, it's a day-to-day work on whoever we are this year type of thing. But once we get into tournaments, absolutely it comes up. The alumni are very involved in the tournament. They're very supportive of the kids during the tournament. On our Facebook page, the alumni post alumni from 40 years ago and alumni from last year post good luck to the kids. So the kids are very in tune that this is a tradition that they should strive for.
Paul, I want to ask you because over the years you've always talked to me about how this isn't just about sports and playing games. That your program is about life and how you can help others. And I'd like to just you talk a little bit about what you try to teach the girls. We spoke about this earlier today, and your latest uh, charitable thing, the Victories Over Violence, which you started this year. For 10 years, you had Battles for Breast Cancer. You raised $270,000 for that cause. And now you've gone to a new cause. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that, if you can, what that means to you and to the girls, and just, what this sport means to them beyond the 19 state championships.
Well, as we spoke of earlier, I think when you start coaching, 47 years ago, it was all about can I win? Am I going to be a winner? But as you evolve, I'm a teacher, I'm a mother, I'm a parent. My goal has always been to promote education for my girls, for them to develop, the characteristics that they're going to need to be successful in life. And field hockey is a vehicle for that. They have to learn to get up in the morning when they're tired. They have to learn to face victory and defeat. They have to learn that everything isn't about winning, that there's going to be days when you don't win. Some kids practice all year long and they're on the team, but they don't get to play in the state game. But we're a team. And I have kids, I call them kids, that are 60 years old that I had play for me in my first teams. And they write to me and say, the stuff I learned on the field, the stuff I learned in the program got me through a lot of hard times in life. All our kids go on to school. They go on to school. Community college, 4-year college, hairdressing school, but they know coming into our program that we expect, high academic standards. We hope for them to get some kind of post-high school education.
What about the Victories Over Violence, Paula? How did that come about?
Well, about 15 years ago, I really started thinking about public service. I thought it was something that our young players, in the last 20 years, kids have become very much pampered, so to speak. Often they just feel that everything's about them, and I thought, these kids need to understand there's more in life than them, and let's look outside ourselves. So we started the battle for breast cancer with just 4 teams, and I hope to raise $1,000 the first year, and it was to raise money for the Martha B. Weber Center in Farmington, and we raised $16,000 that year, and I was like, whoa. We then expanded to 12 teams. So before COVID, we had 12 teams in the last year, and we raised $45,000 in that summer. Now, these are just kids doing bottle drives and going, house to house, doing, toll bridge things. They're kids raising money. Every cent that they raise goes on to people. It doesn't go into an organization. And we have a big tournament and we celebrate. We have a huge education piece. and we used to go to the hospital and tour the breast care center, whatever. And Victories Over Violence. After COVID, there was a lot of family violence, and there was a lot of interest in educating these young women regarding family violence. Sexual violence, it was psychological, emotional. And so we moved on to that. We only had 4 teams this summer, and we did it on our practice field because our game field was closed and we had no colleges to go to. And the 4 teams, we won $16,000. The best thing was that the family violence people in central Maine came and did at the space in Skowhegan. They came and did a big seminar workshop, and nobody walked out of there that wasn't changed. You know, the players were changed, the coaches were changed. We just learned so many things to help us survive in this world. And everybody's excited about doing it next year. I think next year we'll be back at Thomas. Hopefully we'll get 8 teams in next year and keep raising it.
Great.
Paula, segueing over to this year's team, and I know we talked a little bit about this at the Winslow Play Day. It was the first thing that was brought up. But coming into this season, this is kind of a unique team this year, and that's probably I know you say that's an easy way of putting it. In a roster of 23 players, more than half are either freshmen or sophomores who are really getting their first legitimate varsity experience this year. Even though you came into the year with the 19 consecutive regional titles, what were the expectations coming into the year with this group? Were there expectations coming into the year with this group with that youth that you have on this roster?
Well, my expectations are always the same. My expectation is we'll play a state championship game. Last summer, our juniors were on that group with the 2019 team of 14 seniors, so they didn't get to play. There was 3 of them. The sophomores have never played in a tournament, and the freshmen didn't even have middle school field hockey last year. So over the summer, it was challenging. We played about 10 to 12 scrimmages, and we lost every single scrimmage. And by the end of the summer, my husband said to me, he goes, "Paula, they don't look like they're happy." And I'm like, well, when you lose every game, you're not winning every game. And, we just sat down and made a plan. It's like, okay, what goal? I'm a teacher, Tammy Bino's a teacher. We set goals every day. Today we're going to learn how to dodge. Tomorrow we're going to learn this. And it started to come. And the very first game we had this year, we played Bangor, and we won 10-0. And they walked off the field. They were just astounded. They were like, did we really get that much better? And I'm like, well, I guess we did. But last night, we started 2 freshmen, 6 sophomores, I think, and 4 juniors. They're a young group. They're a very young group. But they're just like a sponge. Everything we teach them, they suck it in and they work to get better.
Okay. Paula, we've had other field hockey coaches on the show, and we've talked about the goggle situation here in Maine. Where do you stand? Maine's one of the only states that still requires them to be worn by field hockey players.
I'm totally opposed to them. I've coached field hockey 47 years, and, we went, 40 years or whatever. I don't know how long it's been, and there were never any eye injuries. In fact, if you look at statistics, basketball has the highest level in baseball. Well, you would never consider putting goggles on baseball players or basketball players, would you? There was an incident that happened in Maine, and yes, it was unfortunate, but I think, injuries are inherent in whatever sport you play. Doesn't matter if it's swimming or volleyball or whatever. And since we've been wearing the goggles, we have had one concussion after another. The kids can't see. They run into each other. Last year I had a kid who had her face totally scarred because the goggle was, pushed across. No, I'm not for goggles. No one in the world wears goggles. None of the college teams wear goggles. When we went to tournaments year before COVID, they would have right on the front of the tournament when we left the state, do not bring your goggles. You're not wearing goggles. The officials don't want goggles. And I just think it's really unfortunate. We voted this summer, the Maine Field Hockey Association, and it was every single coach, but 2, I think, voted not to wear goggles.
Thank you.
Paul, I want to ask you a little bit about the game itself. I mean, again, you say you've been coaching 47 years. You've seen the changes in this game. How, what have been the biggest changes that have made this sport such a great sport for the girls?
There's a combination of things. The relaxation of the rules. When we first started, we had roll-ins. We used to roll the ball in on the side. We had a bully every 5 minutes. The grass was this long. We had offsides. Once they got rid of offsides, that was huge. I mean, at that point, we could really play field hockey. Today, I mean,
well, before that, Paul, every game was 1-0 because you couldn't score. I mean, it was
tough to score.
It was.
When I played at Wilton Academy in the 60s, our toes on our sticks were about that long. So you always had to get your feet around because there was really no Indian dribble to speak of until the head of the stick got smaller in the 70s. But it's changed in every way. I mean, they did away with sticks, the blatant obstruction as long as your feet are moving. It's just a beautiful game to watch now. And if you play it on the right surface, most schools are getting turf. We don't have turf in Skowhegan, but my athletic director, John Christopher, he keeps our field mint. In fact, it's faster than turf. It's much faster than turf. So
I was going to say, I've heard that your field is actually better than turf in many ways.
It's getting a little bumpy in November when it gets cold. It gets a little bumpy, but our field is amazing. We're very blessed to have that field. But I would say field conditions. I mean, we used to play in grass that high. Today it's a beautiful game to watch. It used to have a lot of whistles. There's still whistles. But the self-starts are it isn't like put the ball down, look around and go. You self-start and you take off. And I'm sure anybody who comes and watches the game today, they just, people say to me, wow, it's just so much fun to watch. It's addicting, which is great because it didn't used to be.
To go along with that, Paula, the development of some of the programs in the state, and you've kept it close, especially in the Central Maine teams. You've obviously played against Messalonskee, Mount Blues, but again, with those play days, I get to see some of the Class C schools. Just how have you kind of seen the development of some of these programs that you either played against or you've had a chance to witness with those Class B teams? I know this past year alone, just one example, Shaughnessy Saucier, who has Division I coaching experience with Bryant, takes over the Nokomis program. They had some success this year with that, and it looks like they're turning things in a good direction. From your view standpoint of seeing some of these programs develop, how has that kind of changed over the years?
Well, I would say 15 years ago, we had the best program because we did it all. We went to camps, we went to futures, we did little kid field hockey, we did summer programs, and we won games 10-0, 10-0, 10-0. Well, after a while, everybody looks around and says, well, seriously, if they can do it, why can't we do it? And I'll tell you, field hockey in Maine, we send more athletes to play college at all three levels than any other sport. And that a lot of people don't realize that. The number of Division I athletes, I mean, I think we've had 45 from Skowhegan since I've been there. So, and pages of Division II and III. So, the parity today, it's not like it used to be. I mean, we played Oxford Hills last night, and they were amazing, just amazing. Mount Ararat, all the level of play in all these schools. They have junior programs now. Their kids playing clubs, indoor field hockey, and it's just really grown. And there's a lot of parity. The best thing I think about Maine field hockey is the coaches that I know. We're a tight group. Last night after the game, Cindy Goddard came over to me, and it was just really special. I think we are a tight group. We've been together a long time, and we really care about each other as people. And I think this summer when we had our play days, it was just joyful to be back together again. Everybody was like old home week. And I don't know if other sports have that, but in Maine field hockey, we definitely have that.
Thank you.
Great. Paula, thanks for joining us tonight. Good luck this weekend in your 20th consecutive state championship game.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Paula.
Bye-bye.
Paula Doughty from Skowhegan Area High School Field Hockey. We will now move on to Athletes of the Week, starting with Orono cross-country runner Ruth White. A sophomore, White ran the third fastest time in course history at the state championships at Troy Howard Middle School in Belfast. She ran 17 minutes, 31.92 seconds, and White led Orono to the girls' Class C state championship. Dave, you've seen Ruth run a couple times this year. Tell us about her.
She's a spark plug for sure, and she dominated the competition this year, especially at states, especially at Festival of Champions, in both at the Troy Howard course in Belfast this year. I think what I appreciate watching with Ruth is that she's had quite the sportsmanlike behavior. She'll finish a race long before anybody else, and she won't even stop to rest. She'll run back to the middle of the course to cheer on other runners to finish up. She's just, cheering people along. She's been dominant all season. I get a very, and some of our viewers might recognize this name. Abby Leonardi it comes to mind when I watch Ruth run. Abby Leonardi ran for Kennebec some time ago, had a very successful high school career. I get that same sort of vibe watching Ruth White compete, but she has dominated the competition this year, and looks like that might continue for some time.
Yeah, we're going to get to see her for 2 more years at least. From Winthrop Field Hockey, Maddie Perkins. Perkins scored 3 goals and assisted on 3 others, and the top-seeded Ramblers beat Lisbon to advance to the Class C state championship game, which we will talk about along with the other state championships in a little bit. Sophie Dixon from Yarmouth Volleyball in Monday's Class B state championship match. She had 38 assists, 10 service points, a couple of timely kills, and several key defensive saves as the Clippers edged Cape Elizabeth in 5 sets to complete a perfect season. Charlie Houghton from Deergo Football. Houghton passed for 323 yards and 2 touchdowns. He ran for 61 yards and 2 scores, including the game-winning touchdown from 25 yards out in the Cougars' 35-30 semifinal win over Mountain Valley. Sarah Talon from Wyndham Girls Soccer. She scored 3 goals in a 3-0 win over Gorham in the Class A South Championship yesterday. She will take on Brunswick with the Eagles for the state title on Saturday. Eve Martineau from Levitt Field Hockey, the senior midfielder, led the Hornets into the Class B state title game on Saturday. She scored a goal and assisted on the game winner as Levitt stunned top-ranked York 2-1 in the semifinals. Then she scored the clinching goal as Levitt defeated second-ranked Cape Elizabeth in the Class B South title game. Mike, tell us about Eve.
You know what? I didn't know much about her until I saw her play these last 2 games. She's a really phenomenal player. She's going to go to WPI to play next year. And she just controls the game all around for Levitt. She's the flyer on penalty corners. I saw her break up so many plays and crucial moments for them. Late in the game against York, York had a penalty corner. She broke that up. The other day against Cape Elizabeth, it was still 1-0. 4 minutes left. They have a penalty corner. She rushes out and breaks up that play. A minute later, she scores the clinching goal. She's really, I've talked to a lot of people who just say she is, undoubtedly the leader of that group, and they seem to feed off of her. And they got a young team. They've got 2 freshmen who play very, pivotal roles for them. One's their leading scorer, and I think they follow her lead. She's a very impressive player.
Every team needs a player like that. All right, Delaney Hessler from Bonnie Eagle Cross Country captured her first Class A individual state title on Saturday in Belfast, led the Scots to their 3rd consecutive team championship. Eli Soren from Oxford Hills Football, he completed 8 of 10 passes for 196 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also ran for 154 yards and 2 touchdowns on 13 carries in the Vikings' 49-20 win over Bangor. Taylor Torres from Chevers Field Hockey, the junior, scored both goals as the Stags defeated Scarborough for the Class A South title. She had 35 goals and 7 assists to lead Chevers, which takes an unbeaten record in the state championship game against Skowhegan. Abbott Valentine from Hamden Academy Cross Country, the senior, recorded the best time among boys at the state championships. He ran 15 minutes, 34 seconds on the rain-slick course in Belfast on Saturday. Dave, I'm sure you've seen Abbott run as well.
I have, and again, another excellent runner, top runner, a male runner in the state. But the interesting thing with Valentine is actually the rivalry that he had throughout this season with Dan McCarthy of Bangor. They had, in my opinion, the best male cross-country running rivalry throughout the season. McCarthy actually topped Valentine at the A North Regional the week prior, and had a strong finishing kick while doing it. And then Valentine came back to top McCarthy by just over a second. I believe the time was at States. So they pushed each other, and they would tell you in interviews after races, they pushed each other all season. It was a friendly rivalry. it was a strong rivalry, and it was what fans enjoyed most at these races, was seeing Valentine and McCarthy run against each other, with Valentine getting the edge this season.
You love to hear stuff like that. Finally, we have a couple more athletes of the week. Allison Slicer from Oxford Hills Field Hockey. She scored both goals in the Vikings' 2-0 quarterfinal win over Brewer, then scored the only goal in a 1-0 overtime win over Mount Ararat in the A North semifinals. She also scored in the 2-1 loss to Skowhegan Wednesday in the regional final. And finally, Natalie Moynihan from Scarborough Volleyball, a freshman outside hitter. She scored the winning point in the Red Storms' 5-set victory over previously unbeaten Biddeford in the Class A state championship match. She finished with 12 kills and 2 aces. Congratulations to all those athletes of the week. We'll now move on to the Varsity Maine polls. Big thanks, as usual, to Bob Obi, who makes sure that we all get these in and gets these all compiled for us every week. Starting with boys soccer, which seems to be the tightest. At the top, we have a tie for first place between Marshwood and Yarmouth. They're going to both be playing in state championship games this weekend. Marshwood in Class A for the first time. They'll be taking on Brunswick. Yarmouth in Class B. They'll be taking on Winslow. Then we have Brunswick, Winslow, and Lewiston rounding out the top 5. Girls soccer, Wyndham, no surprise there. They've been number 1 for a while now. They get all 6 first-place votes, followed by Brunswick, who will be their opponent in the Class A state championship game. Cape Elizabeth, Bangor, and Gorham. In field hockey, no change at the top. Skowhegan, number 1 with 5 first-place votes. Number 2, Chevers with 1 first-place vote, followed by Scarborough, Levitt, and Winthrop. And Mike, that first place is going to get settled in the Class A state game Saturday afternoon.
That's going to be a phenomenal game. Both teams, talking to Paula about her team, it sounds very similar. They're very athletic, very skilled. Chevers has 3 scorers who, Taylor Torrey and Lucy Johnson. They've combined for 63 goals this year. I mean, that's pretty phenomenal. Chevers has 95 goals this year. Skowhegan has like 94. It's going to be a phenomenal back and forth game, and I think you're going to see, as Paula said, the game is so much better. You're going to see field hockey at its best in that game. It's going to be even. If anything, maybe Chevers has an edge in experience, although they haven't been in state championship games. Neither has Skowhegan. Chevers does have 4 seniors who start, and several juniors who play prominent roles. It'll be interesting to see what happens this Saturday.
Okay. And finally, the football poll, Thornton Academy, number 1 again with 7 first-place votes, followed by Oxford Hills. Then Portland, Wyndham, and Bangor. We're getting into the playoff rounds for all the football now. And that kind of will lead us into game of the week. I'll start with the 8-man football semifinals, or regional finals, I should say. 8-man large in the north, we have Morse at Waterville. And in the south, we have Mount Ararat at Chevers. Dave, have you seen this Waterville team at all this year?
I haven't seen them in action, but the name that sticks out every time Waterville has played this season has been Liam Von Awesome, the quarterback for Waterville. He puts up big numbers every single week against MDI, which was a 50-40 win. He ran for 288 yards, had 5 TDs. He's been the best 8-man player in the Central Maine area this season, hands down. And he makes that offense go. As they go, he goes, or as he goes, they go. It's either way. It's tied hand in hand, and he's the leader. And if he can be stopped, you win the game. But he's a tough one to stop.
Yeah, that looks like it's probably going to be a shootout. Both teams scored a lot of points, but both teams giving up a lot of points as well. In the 8-man small north, we have Stearns versus Dexter. And in the south, we have Maranacook versus Dirigo. Maranacook knocking off number 1 undefeated Telstar last year. So some interesting games there with the states coming up a week after that. Field hockey state championships are going to be at Coney High School in Augusta on the new turf there on Saturday. We mentioned Skowhegan versus Chevers in Class A. Class B, Old Town versus Levitt. Dave, you saw Old Town beat Lawrence the other night to win the North, right?
I did see them, and it was an interesting game for sure. The story of the game was Lawrence had a 20-6 advantage in penalty corners, a 10-0 advantage in the third quarter alone. It's not always a guarantee, obviously, on a penalty corner that it's an automatic goal, but Lawrence certainly had their opportunities. But what was key was the Old Town defense was able to turn that away each and every single time. didn't really allow many clean shots for Lawrence. And Old Town was awarded a penalty corner right before halftime, and they took advantage with a goal from Logan Gardner and scrum off a rebound in front of the cage, and got that 1-0 lead and eventually 1-0 win. So Old Town
has her only goal of the year, Dave.
The only goal of the year, which
for Logan Gardner, her first goal. It comes at a good time.
It was at the right time. It was at the right time for sure. But no, it's a tough defensive group from Old Town, and that was a good Lawrence team. They got a victory over.
And in Class C, we have MCI versus Winthrop. Mike, these are two teams that seem to get to the state championship game quite a bit.
They do, and they score an awful lot of goals. I think Winthrop scored 113 goals on the year, and Winthrop's up in MCI's up in the 90s. They both have a prolific score on each side. It's that could be an 8-7 game. It could be. Forget it. You could set all kinds of scoring records for that game. That one's gonna be a fun one to watch.
Okay. And the boys soccer, the A and B games are going to be at Massapequa High School in Waterboro. Dave Dyer, you know a little bit about that place. We got Class A, Brunswick versus Marshwood, and in B, Winslow versus Yarmouth. Winslow and Yarmouth are both undefeated. Yarmouth coming from behind last night in a close game against Cape Elizabeth, down 1-0 to the half, scored 2 goals in the second half to take the win. In Class C and D, those will be up in Presque Isle. Waynfleet versus Fort Kent in Class C. North Yarmouth Academy versus Lee Academy in Class D. And in girls soccer in Class A, we have Brunswick versus Wyndham. Wyndham 18-0. Kind of that team that a lot of people thought could make a run this year with so much experience coming back from the 2019 team. Of course, nobody got any playoffs in 2020. But that experience that they got as young players in 2019 has certainly helped the Eagles along this season. In Class B, Herman versus Cape Elizabeth. Cape Elizabeth had a 3-0 win over Yarmouth in the regional final yesterday. And Mike, you saw Cape Elizabeth the other day in a regional playoff game against York. They just have so many options when it comes to scoring. Maggie Cochran or Emily Supple.
Oh, they're amazing. The York coach said after the game that, it's not like you can pay attention to just one of them, because either one of them, it would be the best player on any other team. They're extremely talented, and they play as a team. They play very well together. They feed off each other. They play off each other. That's a pretty dominating team.
Yeah, Cochran with a hat trick in that game against York. You saw Supple with a hat trick against Yarmouth yesterday. So it's kind of hope one of them has an off guy. Hope one has an off game, and you mark up the other one successfully.
Yep.
Class C, we'll have Marana Cook versus Bucksport in the girls' championship game, and Class D, North Yarmouth Academy versus Wisdom. Real quickly, Mike, what's the game you're most looking forward to this weekend, state championship wise?
Skowhegan Chevrolet field hockey. I just think that's going to be a phenomenal game. I'll tell you what, Chevrolet and Scarborough in the South final the other night was one of the best field hockey games I've seen in the last 5 years.
Wow.
It was back and forth. It was beautifully played, I think we're going to see the same thing. I would imagine on the new turf field, it's going to be fast. Because that grass, that surface is going to be brand new, perfect. There shouldn't be any problems with it. I think this is going to be a phenomenal game to see.
And Dave, to kind of circle back to football playoffs, a couple big games this weekend. Kennebec and Marshwood is going to be a big one in B South. Kind of an interesting rivalry game in B North in your neck of the woods. Lawrence and Coney, they've had some great playoff games over the recent years.
They have, and this year, both teams have been teams that have experienced injuries but are coming into this game relatively full strength, particularly Lawrence, which had some key players out for a few weeks. They first played against each other in the regular season. Coney got a 28-14 win, but Lawrence was missing multiple players that game. Lawrence has been on a roll lately, especially the last 2 games. Parker Higgins, their running back, in those 2 games, has rushed for over 600 yards. And it scored 10 touchdowns, 6 in the first regular season finale against Messalonskee, and then 4 more the following week against Messalonskee again. Coney is doing what they're doing. They throw the ball. They throw the ball around with their quarterback Presti, who did very well last week. It was 9-11, 150 yards passing with 4 TDs against Brewer. It's going to be a good game. And basically it's going to come down to whoever comes in with a stronger defense that night is going to come away the winner, because you know what to expect. Who's bringing the defense for this one?
Okay, that's going to do it for us this week on Varsity Maine Live. I'll remind you to please check out varsitymaine.com for all your coverage of Maine high school sports. For Dave, for Mike, for Coach Dowdy, I'm Travis. Thanks for watching.